We're live, yay! Hello and welcome to Practically with me, John Stevenson. Thank you very much for joining me. It's a bit cloudy and grey outside, so I've got my light on so you can actually see me. If I switch the light off, you won't be able to see me anymore. Oh, look, I'm gone. There we go. So, there's the fun over with today. So today we're going to have continue looking at the banking in Clojure. We're also going to have a quick look at some of the changes I've made to the practically Clojure deps.edn work as well. If you want to catch up what I'm doing, so I'm still currently sponsored by Clojure Together, so thank you very much. I've added the latest updates, Q3 updates I've got, so August, September updates. If you want to see exactly what I've been doing, there's a little journal there, and that comes out every 2 weeks. We've got the playlists. I don't think we've added any playlists. And I've moved the books around, so I brought the Clojure book up to the along with the other two. I think all these 3 books are very usable now. There's still plenty of content to add, but I think there's enough there to for them to be useful. And I've classed the other 2 books as kind of alpha. The Clojure script needs a bit of rewriting, but there are some useful projects in there. And the data science one is just really just a collection of content ideas. So you can go on there and think and go and have a look at this, kind of some of the things that I'm considering on writing about. I did some videos around data visualization for kind of data science around the COVID-19 things in the UK. So I'm going to put those in, but this is going to be more of a longer term project. It's something I'm going to work on over the winter holidays. But if you do have any ideas about what you want to cover, what you want to see in there, then feel free to go in and add some suggestions there. I also recommend if you're more serious about learning data science, then have a look at deep learning and linear algebra from Dragon. These are really good books to get you going. There's also some, I'm going to include some other references there as well. I think I've got the Henry Garner book somewhere in there. Yeah, there we go. Clojure Data Science. Okay. Boop. And then if you want to get in touch, then I've got Practically, but I've also got this, started this Discord channel as well. Well, that's not mine. That's apropos, and Conjure's got one, and I've started one as well. Just to see if that's a better experience. Potentially we can use that as a way to engage during these broadcasts. So you can have more interactive chat there as well. You'll be able to have nicely formatted code if you want to paste coded samples in there as well. So it's, if I can get my head around it, then we'll give that a try one weekend. There should be a link to this Discord channel as an invite in the YouTube chat, and also in the I put it in the Clojure and Slack Practically channel as well. Oops, where's all the buttons gone? And there's usual ways to support me as well. Okay, what are we going to do today? Oh, yes, so one of the things I've been working on in the background for the last few weeks was the new release of the Clojure tools, the Clojure CLI tools, so that if you're creating a deps.edn project, and I've got this repo on GitHub, which has a whole bunch, I think there's around about 30 or more aliases, which just allow you to, we go to an example here. So here I've got an example where I can use the these project-wide, these user-level aliases to run a whole bunch of community tools based on top of Clojure CLI. And so I can actually use this command here to actually update all my aliases, all the library versions that the aliases uses. And I've changed the names of these around a little bit. So I'm using qualified keywords, as all the aliases are essentially keywords, and to give a better context of what you're doing on the command line, then I put the context in here. So instead of just calling outdated, I'm doing project outdated. So it's kind of giving you an idea that this outdated is relevant to outdated things inside the Clojure project. And there's also some, so this is using the new M option, which in the main is replacing the -A for aliases. It's still there, but that's kind of eventually going to be deprecated. And then there's a new X aliases as well, which we can use. So M is calling Clojure main, which is probably what most people are doing already. And then there's this new Clojure exec, and we can define exec function and exec args and call them that way. So it's more of a kind of Clojure-Eden approach to doing things rather than a command line string. If we go and have a look at creating a new project, there we go. So typically we create Clojure projects and just use the alias new. So here I've got project new. I'll make that a little bit bigger. There we go. And then the template name. But you kind of need to know that that is the template name. So you need to know the format of this command. So that's something you need to remember or go and look up. And then they've got the name of the so there's a specific order you need to pass these in because they're not qualified options. They're kind of options that you have to know, you have to put them in the right place. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's fairly easy to learn. It's a fairly straightforward approach. But with the Clojure X version, you can set defaults up. So I've set some defaults where I could just do Clojure X project new, and it would create a library project called practicalli playground. So if I do that, so if we jump into my command line, so I've got 3 projects in there already, but I don't have a playground. But if I create that there, if I just do that, then it should create a new project. If it's all working, there we go. It's create a new project using the library template. And if I look here, it's created a playground project for me. There we go. Just using the library template. And I can also override that. So at the moment it's using, I've just hard-coded some default values in there. So I've set the name to be practicalli playground, but you can override that on the command line. And you can also override the template as well. So if I take this one, I'm going to use a template called app and a name of my project as so. And therefore it gives a bit more context into what this command is doing. So if somebody comes along to see the project, you can see, okay, this is how the project's been created. It's been created with a template called app, and a name, so on. So it's more easier to understand what it's doing without having to understand the kind of the positional places of all the arguments. Just to show that it's created something. Yeah, it's created my application. So I'm going to create some templates as well to do more things around that. These templates I've created are for Clojure CLI tools projects, so they're deps.edn configurations. So if I look at so you can see we've got a deps.edn file in there, and you can also use this is all based on the CLJ new project, so you can also use Leiningen and boot templates, but those will create lining in or boot projects. So I'm going to create a few practicalli projects templates as well, just using the same CLJ new project. So I'll cover that in a separate video. So that's kind of a taste of things to come. That's the way kind of quite a few of the tools developers are kind of moving, and I think it's the kind of gradual way that we're migrating to when using Clojure CLI. Okay, more of that at another time. Let's go. Okay, no questions. Right, so we're going to move on to the practically banking in Clojure. So yes, there we go. Let's do. Yeah, so the practically deps.edn file is in the resources for the practically Clojure book, and I'm using that extensively as well. I'm going to do some videos this week to cover just how to use it. Okay, that's enough of that. So we've been working on the banking on Clojure, which is quite a long project. There's still lots and lots and lots of things to add to it, but hopefully you've been following the details of what we've been doing there. And so we're going to do, I've done a little bit of refactoring, so we're going to walk through what we've covered. And going to also talk a little bit about fixtures, unit test fixtures, and running them. I've also set up handlers to be able to create the database and drop the database, so that when we run on the CLI, we can actually work. So if I go to CircleCI.com and go to the app, I'm already logged in, so it should take me straight there. That's not the project I want to be in. Practically, there we go. And so we've got success. We actually built it. Yay! So I'll show you how we went from failed to success today as well. So let's have a look at the code. So the code is all on, I'll push the website to GitHub. So you get GitHub practicalli, and then it's banking on Clojure-web app. Then all the code is there. It's all in the live branch because it's all live. It's passed. Yay! There we go. So let's have a look at the changes. Boom. So last week we covered the fact that I'd split the data access namespace into several namespaces. So just remind you of that briefly. So we've got in our source, we've got source underneath source practicalli. We've got the banking on Clojure, handler helpers, request handler. And I've removed the more experimental code to make this project a bit clearer. And we've got access, connection, schema, and specs. So the connection was just the database specifications. The schema is the creating the tables, etc., etc. And there's a lot of stuff I've kind of commented out there. I've moved the create tables into this access namespace, and this is where I've done the a bit of refactoring. So one of the things I was trying to do is get the unit tests to work, and the unit tests have they make use of the database. So if we go to the handler helper in the tests, so we got test, handler helper, test, so there's request handler, the handler helper. We can see I was calling this new customer test, which uses, which does go off and creates a new customer. So it calls the So it calls a practicalli handler helper new customer, which actually goes off and tries to create a new customer record in the database. And that worked fine locally. The test ran fine locally, but when I ran it on the CI server, then it failed. And that's because I've already run code in the REPL that actually created the database. So it creates these banking on Clojure files. So that's where the database is. But when you're spinning up a new test on any continuous integration server, then those files don't exist. I'm not going to check them into version control because that wouldn't make sense. It's something that's generated, so I tend not to include that in the version control. So rather than do that, we created some code to be able to create the database on the fly. So go back to access. So I was going to create tables and then delete tables, but then I realized that these are both kind of essentially almost doing the same thing. The only difference is the kind of the schema that we're passing to them. So rather than create two separate functions with the same code in, then I created two smaller functions which use a shared piece of code. So the shared piece of code is essentially kind of opening the connection, creating a transaction, because we want to run all of the scripts at once or none of them. So when we're creating all the tables, we want to be able to ensure that all the tables are created together in a single transaction, and then we just have this loop that goes over those and executes the transaction. And reading the documentation for Next JDBC, it suggests using execute one rather than execute when you're using DDL scripts like we're doing. So when we're using the create table and the drop table scripts, then it recommends using execute one. And we do that in the context of transaction, and we're passing in the SQL statements. So we're doing customer drop, account drop, transaction drop, and then we're doing customer create, account create, and transaction create. So this create tables is actually going off and is cleaning up the database first. It's basically deleting the database and then doing that first. In fact, I could have just called delete tables here instead of doing this. I could just replace that with delete tables. That's interesting. Yeah, that would make more sense. Yeah. And then I'd have to put this. Let's do that. So we're doing delete tables there. So we've got customer drop, account drop, and transaction drop with DB spec. And then have I got this running? Just check my REPL is running. It is running. Yeah, there we go. So rather than define that twice, we can just do, we can do delete tables. What's that complaining about? We need to, pass in DB spec. Okay, there we go, DB spec. So that's much simpler. I like that. Nice little bit of live refactoring there. Cool. And I've included a show table just as a yeah, as a way, a convenient way to go and just check that the tables are created there. So these are all, I put these all under schema management, and this is just a little helper function here as well. And then the kind of main API of this namespace is still the create, read, update and delete. So I could make these, well, I'm going to use these in a different namespace, so I'm not going to make them private. But I've made this function private because, yeah, I'm only really, at the moment, I'm only going to be using execute transaction. It's quite a generic function, so I'm just going to include that here. If I wanted to make it more, if I was going to use it in other areas, then I'd probably I'd make it public again. But using private just kind of gives me a nice visual clue that I'm only using this within the context of that particular namespace. Okay, there we go. 20. So we've got these three functions, and so the delete tables and create tables are called by the handler helper. I've got to create these very simple business logic focused helpers. One called create table and one called delete table. And these are more of a convenience, like an abstraction over here, where we can just yeah, create the tables and then delete the tables. And it's just a simple way to be able to do that. And then at some point we'll use either arrow and or a lifecycle library to be able to kind of inject the DB spec that we're actually using into here. But for now, I can then call these create table and delete table functions to set those up, which means we can go all the way back to the tests. So we go back to the helper tests, and now I can create the table and delete the table database tables as I like, because those convenience functions were in handler helpers there, and so it's all part of the API that I'm testing. It's all part of the namespace I'm testing. So yeah, I don't have to include any other namespaces to be able to run the tests. Ooh, no questions. No. So I have my handler helpers, and I've got my database created. I can delete the database where I want to. And then I need to decide when I'm actually going to do it. So I need to do it at some point before I run the tests. I could put that into each of the tests. I could create some kind of if let kind of thing to be able to run the tests. I'll just put a function in here to actually. Ooh, there we go. I'll put that in there. I put a function in here to just create the tests and so create the database and then tidy up afterwards. But that's that'll be very inefficient. There'll be a lot of duplication of code. So we can use fixtures, which is a fairly common term in unit testing, to basically set up some kind of state, and then run a number of tests, and then tear down the state or reset the state to something else. So the state can be kind of the state of the application, or it could be a state of an external a persistent store like a database. And so we can use one or more fixtures with one or more tests to be able to do this. It makes it nice and simple. And a fixture, just with, like most things in Clojure, a fixture is just a function. But it's a function that takes a function. So we're expecting to take a function here, and this is typically going to be the this is going to be the test or range of tests that you're actually going to run with the fixture. And the fixture does three things. It does the setup. In this case, we're doing correct database. It does the deletes. It runs the tests and it does the delete. So I do have a page on fixtures in the book. So I've added a page to the Clojure, practically Clojure book on fixtures, like tear up and set down. And so you can use the fixtures to kind of fixtures to basically, you run all the tests relevant for the fixtures. So we do the setup, we run one or more tests, and then we tear down or reset the state to a known value. And all we need to do to be able to use fixtures is add the use fixtures function to how we're requiring the Clojure test namespace. So here I'm just referring the specific functions that we're using from the Clojure test namespace. And we can use the function use fixtures to be able to determine when we're actually going to run the fixtures each time. And so if we can either specify once or every. And so if we use fixtures once, we can define which fixtures we want to run just once, and that's once for all the tests in the namespace. So if we have 10 tests in the namespace, we'll run the fixtures once, we'll run the setup once before we run any of the tests, then we'll run the tests, and then we'll run the teardown once for any of the fixtures as well. So these will only ever run once for that particular namespace. Or we can use every. So we can use every to say, we use every to say that every time we run a test, we'll do the setup, we'll then run a test, and then we'll reset the state, we'll tear down. And so if you've got 10 def tests in your namespace, then you'll run the use fixture. You run each fixture 10 times. And if you've got 10 unit tests and you use once, your new fixtures only run once. And that's it really. So that's a simple mechanism. So defining the fixtures themselves again is just a function, and then you just decide when to actually run those features. And if you wanted to, I haven't really done this, but you can also, if you've got something really simple, then you could have an anonymous function as part of your fixture. I guess if there's if there's something really simple to do, or if you abstracted it away to a single call, then you could do that. But if you're starting to put a fairly big function in there, then it's probably best to create a function definition. Oh, there we go. There we go. We've got an example. So let's jump back, and then we can use these fixtures. The fixtures just work essentially from the unit testing runners. So you can just use the unit test runners will just use the fixtures automatically. It's something they'll look for. It's an expected part of the Clojure.test API. So if they see the use fixtures we've got here, then when I run the test, it knows that it needs to run the database reset fixture each time it wants to run a def test. and this is fixture. So we're just creating a database table, and off we go. So now I've changed my code. Let's see if it still works. Let's run the tests. Run all the tests, and I've got something. I've broken something. Oh, create record does not exist. What did I do? Oh, I probably haven't compiled I haven't loaded everything into the REPL yet. Let's do the. Oops. Create record does not exist. Oh, the data access is not. Maybe that's not loaded. That's loaded. There we go. Yes, I don't have all my application loaded into the REPL. That's why I was complaining, I think. And if you go back to the tests, the wrong ones, handler tests. That's all loaded. Boom, boom, boom. Yay! So we've got seven assertions in 7 tests, and we've got 0 failures. Yay! There we go. So that's one of those tests is this new customer test, which is creating the database on the fly. And so if you're going to run these tests, you need to make sure with H2 then there's nothing else connected to that database. And so if you've got like dbeaver or something else connected to the database, then H2's only got one connection, so it would cause the tests to fail. But I don't have anything else running, so it's all good. And one of the other things I've added to the test, just because I kind of thought about if we're running all these database tests, what happens if running longer tests, or database tests may take a little bit longer to run, or we might just have a lot of database tests around the database which cumulatively take a lot of time. So we can identify, we can put some metadata around the tests. So in this case I've just put the little kind of metadata here, and just put the database keyword on that as the metadata. And this is referred to as a test selector. So if we go to the web page here, I do have another page on test selectors. There we go. So as your project grows, you want to be able to keep running the tests, but you want to have like fast feedback. You don't want them to slow you down. So running the tests frequently there shouldn't be anything blocking you from doing that. But if the tests take 10 minutes to run, then you're probably going to run them a lot less than you would do if they take 10 seconds to run. So one of the ways you can still run the important tests around the work you're doing currently without having that slowdown is to use test selectors. And that way you can group all your tests and just run specific groups of tests based on what the kind of feedback you actually want to get. And if you have a very large project, so when I was working at a big financial company, we had quite a large application that was processing around like 30 million transactions a day. So there's a lot of like moving parts to that. We had to do a lot of different transformations, and so we had kind of tests we just run at development time. There was database specific tests, so if we were doing any work around the database, we could run those and get feedback on that. And then there was kind of integration tests and performance tests. So we're running things like Gatling, which does a lot of load testing, and so we could put performance or load testing metadata on those tests, and then only run them like less frequently. So run them overnight, or run them at times when we're not hitting the network as well and hitting the servers. So the servers might be shared, so we might not want to run those during business hours, even if they're only developer systems. If other developers are using those, and we basically kill the servers by hammering them as hard as we can, then the other developers are going to get a little bit upset that we're hogging all the resources. We did that with the database, and we certainly realized that that was not a good practice to do. And there's also some other ways. If you look at the Clojure test runner, there's also other groupings you can set up as well. So you can group using the sort of test.edn. You can also group things in, not just by metadata, but also you can actually explicitly define sets of tests and that you actually want to run, and just run those, and you can just run those specifically all the time. You just set up a watch to run like a handful of tests that you're working on, and you're always going to get instant feedback from the watcher, and you get the feedback on exactly what you're working on. So it's a really nice approach. I'm going to do some more work on that in the next few weeks as well. For example, if you have, and you can also, if you just wanted to run unit tests or just spec tests, you could also separate them out by different categories of tests as well, and just run one kind of category of those tests as well. Actually, while we mentioned that, I did make a change to the Clojure configuration. Let's just have a look at that. So the Clojure test runner is the one I'm using for CircleCI. I can also run it on the command line as well. And here we go. I did make a little bit of a bug for myself when I called this test rather than tests.edn. But now I've changed the name to the proper name. It works just fine. And this is a very verbose version of the configuration. You can simplify this by using some of the tag literals that it's doing here. But I've got two separate sets of tests here. So this is the unit testing. I'm using Clojure to do the Clojure test library to run these tests. And it's looking for file names with the -tests on there, and it's using, and we're including source from source and test from test. And it's going to skip any tests we put this metadata on. So if we go back to handler helper tests, let's create a, say we're working on a new test. Oops. There we go. We did a new transaction. It is a database, but if we put Clojure, skip. I think that's right. If you put the skip test metadata on here, we can still have the code in our tests, but when Clojure comes along, it's not actually going to run those. It's going to skip them because of the configuration. So now we can kind of still run all our tests. We can still have a watcher listening to all our tests if we wanted to, and we don't have to worry about this test that we're still developing tripping up any of the other tests from running. It's not going to break our tests. Boom. Let's go back there. Oh no, where was I? I was looking at the tests. There we go. And you can specify specific tests in here as well. I don't have an example here, but there's examples in the documentation. And then I've got these generated FDEF checks as well, which I can put in. And this is using spec.testCheck. It's just pulling things up from the source. So this is checking basically checking that the functional arguments are correct. So it's basically putting specification on the function arguments. So it's basically saying, are the arguments we're passing into a function of the right type? Or the right specification, really. And we can set up some kind of details for that as well. So I've got these two groups, so I can actually just also specify which one of those to run. If I just wanted to run unit, this is the ID for this set of tests, and this is the ID for this set of tests. So I can be very specific on that, and anything else? Yeah, some other stuff there. One of the other things you can do, and one of the things I'm going to talk about soon is in more detail, is Aero. So Aero is a library where you can actually do replace or inject values based on these kind of tag literals here. So we've got this hash profile. So depending on the profile that we're going to run Clojure in, so there's a default profile that's always there, but you can specify like a CI profile. So if we're in the default profile, then this keyword, this basically this option is going to get the value of true if we're in the default profile, and if we're running it in CI, then it's false. So some CIs don't support like colored output, so there's no point putting colored output there. A more useful one perhaps is this Clojure watch. So we could run watch on the command line, and so the Clojure would just continually look for file changes. When it sees a new file being saved, then it will run all the tests again. So it's like having automatic testing. And then depending on the profile, so if we're running this locally in the development environment, then it's going to be true. But we don't want to do that obviously in the CircleCI. It's going to run all the tests once. We don't need a watcher process running in that. It might even confuse some CIs as well. Yeah, that we go. Yeah, I think that's about all we're going to cover. I'll do some more stuff on Clojure over the coming weeks as well. Just jump back to the tests. And because I'm using Spacemacs, which uses Cider, I can also specify which unit tests to run here using the test selectors. So if I do test A, it probably will actually, oh, it ran, there we go. Oh, it also ran the skip test. So it's actually running that because this is only set up in Clojure. So this is still going to run this test. But if I use the universal argument, so in Spacemacs that's space U, and then run the tests, so I'm going to do comma TA. So it's actually prompting me now right down the bottom in the mini buffer as to which test selectors to actually include. And so I want, say if we do database here, so that will run just those tests with the database metadata on. and testers to exclude. Yeah, I'm just going to not exclude any. So if I put here like the skip test, then it would exclude that. But the include for the database is pretty much going to do that for me as well. So if I press that, it's actually only running one test now. Yeah, so the test selector is a very easy way of doing that. Cool. And that's, you can set that each time you run. And then, or if you're using Clojure, then obviously you can configure that in a few different ways. I'd probably just, if I'm not doing any work on the database and those unit tests are being slow, so if I'm, I guess when I'm going over the network, so if I'm updating if I'm doing some database tests that involve running on Postgres, which is in the cloud, then I might want to just exclude the database tests and just run on other stuff if I'm not working on the database code itself. Hopefully that made sense. Where have we got? What have we done so far? Create a project here, generate functions, unit tests, helper. We've done that. Test selectors. I think that's all the things I wanted to cover. Any questions? No. Okay. So the next thing is to write some more tests for this handler helper tests. And so we've got all our handler helper here. So we've got things like update customer, account, update account, update transaction. So we've basically got our kind of create, read, create, update, read, and delete functions. And so I want to be able to put a test around here and make sure all these work. Then once we've done that, then we can put then we can update the request handler itself to use all those. And one of the things I want to do is basically create there's a lot of UI code in here. So actually create a new namespace. So if we do file, I'm going to create UI I'll call it for now. So we want to create some web pages and probably even create some templates as well. So handy helper there. Save that. So this is going to be like select. So hopefully this should be fairly kind of minimal because what I want to do is create a standard template for those as well. So I'm going to go and look at what's common in the UI. If we go back all the way back to, that's not the right one, banking on Clojure. So we've got a fairly basic UI there at the moment, and it's going to look very similar. In fact, I think this looks a bit like the bank account I actually use for my own personal account. A little bit, a few touches to make it different. But it's going to have a fairly similar structure. Obviously, when we delve into each of these accounts, there's going to be a slightly different kind of layout. But most of this we should be able to kind of get, take a lot of redundancy out of the code and make a nice UI. because at the moment, as we've seen, the request handlers, there's a huge amount of code. I mean, how much code we got in here? We got several hundreds of lines of code, and we're going to do some abstracting, create some, like for ordered lists, we can just create some loops, create some iterations over the items, and then create the lists. This is like creating an unordered list. So we do a lot of that. So I think I've already separated out things like the bank account media object, which I think creates a creates this this kind of section here. So like the current account decorates it with a lambda coins and puts in the buttons there as well. So this is kind of like a nice section we can use, and then we just populate that section with data. So this is what this is doing. Yeah, so we got our buttons here. So we'll be able to call this function with account details. And that streamlined a lot of the code, but we've still got a lot of code to actually do to refactor and make it a lot nicer there as well. So that's definitely a broadcast in itself. Cool. Well, if there aren't any questions, I'm going to leave it there and finish a little bit early. Ooh, the sun's coming out as well. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that useful, and we'll carry on with that. I'm going to do a lot more videos in between the weekly broadcasts. Now I might do a few live broadcasts and some structured videos as well, so have a look out for those, and see you next time. Thank you very much.